Welcome to Part 2 of Literary, Legal, and Civic. We will continue where we left off in reviewing our legal institutions. In our legal area of judicial institutions, we see a continuing story of disgust in various yet important segments of our laws, courts, and enforcement. Many now openly ask the question, are our justice and judicial systems broken? For several years, 2008 through 2015, when Eric Holder as U.S. Attorney General was in charge of the Justice Department under Barack Obama, controversy after controversy swirled around him. To those paying attention, Holder's selective use of the Attorney General's office created a disturbing list of questionable practices, and many claim outright scandals. His authority as Attorney General of the United States included leadership of the Department of Justice, an extensive organization of over 100,000 attorneys, special agents, and other law enforcement personnel and various staff, responsible for enforcing federal laws, preventing crime, protecting the public safety from all threats, including terrorism, and the operation of federal prison system. Key figures and agencies that perform these duties include the FBI, DEA, U.S. Marshals, and the U.S. Attorneys. Unfortunately, Eric Holder was more partisan and loyal to the Obama leadership than he was to the constitutional principles of law and justice. His record over several years as U.S. Attorney General was checkered to say the least, often skewing government resources under his authority for personal ideological reasons, and many times shielding President Obama and his administration from proper legal scrutiny of potential scandals and related issues. Holder ran interference for Obama on many serious issues, rather than have investigations run their normal course. As a result, many people criticize his lack of leadership for preventing justice. In fact, one federal judge was so furious with the lack of ethics he was encountering with DOJ lawyers, he issued a federal judicial order requiring ethics training for as many as 3,000 U.S. Justice Department lawyers. In 2016, Eric Holder's successor, Attorney General Loretta Lynch, is caught by the media meeting secretly with Bill Clinton on a Texas airport tarmac. They chat for 45 minutes, conveniently during the latter stages of the FBI investigation of Hillary Clinton and her email server, and several days before FBI Director James Comey is to report to Congress whether or not legal charges will be brought against Hillary. The Wall Street Journal reports that the U.S. Department of Justice actively put up roadblocks to an FBI investigation of corruption in the Clinton Foundation. The New York Post reports how a number of FBI agents are disgusted with what they see going on and are ready to revolt over the cozy Clinton probe. Beyond the Department of Justice, we had a Supreme Court sitting with a vacancy on the 9-court panel since Justice Scalia's passing in early 2016. Essentially creating a deadlock between conservative and liberal ideological leanings until the vacancy is filled, which eventually happens by President Trump in April of 2017 as Justice Gorsuch is approved by the U.S. Senate. All the while, the politics of the DOJ and the Supreme Court has added to America's distrust in the judicial system. Perhaps one of the underreported developments in American culture over the past decade has been the eroding of our societal fabric and the actual encouragement of a drug culture which invariably leads to drug dependency and a spiraling down of lives and family. With the latest adoption of lenient or permissive drug laws, we see an expansion of states legalizing marijuana for recreational use. We now have 8 states plus Washington, D.C. as of November 8, 2016, that have plunged their citizens and youth into the ugly spiral of widening a drug culture. The linkage with liberal, progressive America is indisputable. Just look at the states affirming a retreat from protecting its citizen and youth from drugs, and compare that to states which voted Democratic and liberal last November. In a recent Gallup poll in 2013, when asked if, do you think the use of marijuana should be made legal or not, the affirmative trend moved dramatically into the 58th percentile, a majority, no doubt reflecting the deepening of a liberal moral relativity into the belly of our culture, and not surprisingly, directly correlated with the 8 years of an extremely liberal Barack Obama presidency. In Colorado, the first state to legalize marijuana for recreational use, the Denver Post cited metrics from the Colorado Department of Safety 1.5 years after legalization, showing a disturbing impact. Some of the highlights. In DUI for pot use, the stats moved from 12% to 15%. Emergency room visits related to pot use went from 739 over a 4-year period, an average of 185, to 956 in June of 2015, an average of 674 in just a year and a half after legalization, or a projected increase of 264%. What's perhaps the most telling is the bottom right hand of the chart. We see in every instance of age a dramatic increase in the use of the drug. The young, ages 12 to 17, up 5 percentage points. Young adults, 18 to 25, up 10 percentage points. And mature adults, 26 and older, up 7 points. If someone needs confirmation to see how a culture is degraded by lawmakers, here it is. Then, more statistics are released by CBS Denver in August of 2016. Shows an alarming increase in all metrics. All the bad numbers certify legalization has resulted in significant societal damage. The most telling are the 3 stats. Colorado youth are now ranked number 1 in the nation for marijuana usage and 74% higher than the national average. Colorado college age group now ranked number 1 in the nation for marijuana usage and 62% higher than the national average. And Colorado adults now rank number 1 in the nation for marijuana use and 104% higher than the national average. Here's another interesting finding, as reported in Ryan Grimm's new book, This Is Your Country on Drugs. When it comes to the use of illegal drugs overall, there is no real correlation with states and their respective political ideology. But that changes when we look at marijuana and cocaine. Both are significantly and positively related to Obama states, liberal and progressive, morally relative. The converse is true of general conservative states, where correlations are negative. When was the last time you heard our former president define the national priority regarding the war on drugs? A clear, strong policy on combating illegal drugs and opioids in our nation. Fighting the major drug cartels, the corruption of the social fabric, has always been, for the previous presidents, a vital and critical priority, as it is now with Donald Trump. However, for the liberal progressive president Barack Obama, for over 8 costly years, the national drug policy shifted to social concerns and away from a vigorous war on the evil drug cartels poisoning the lives of millions. Pandering to his political and left-wing amoral base, Obama drove confusion and misdirection into the war on drugs, giving the cartels greater opportunity to penetrate more gangs, more cities and suburbs, more bank corruptions, more judicial corruption than ever before. If that wasn't enough, Obama furthered his liberal war on drugs by making unprecedented commutations and pardons for former drug dealers and users, liberating over 1,700 dealers from just sentences for cocaine, crack, and heroin conspiracy to distribute and sell drugs to our youth and public. By any measure, an excessive use of the commutation purpose. Many sensible leaders in the country are stunned by his indifference to real justice and public security, asking the question, since when is drug dealing and distribution not a violent crime? You have to ask yourself, to what end was Obama heading across 8 long years? To what strategy was he and his liberal progressives pursuing? In another area, American distrust in our legal institutions of leadership has equally grown. The blatant ignoring of federal law and the sanctity of American citizenship. Over the past 8 years, we've witnessed an explosive growth in the so-called sanctuary cities, cities where the liberal progressive leadership passes resolutions to defy the federal government on cooperation and enforcement of national immigration laws with regards to the apprehension, holding, and transfer of immigrants in violation of the law or with prior felony convictions. Over 200 illegal alien sanctuary cities have sprouted up across the country, with deadly consequences in a number of cases for the citizens of those communities. And again, for 8 years, we had a president, leader of the country, turned his head away from the laws and rejected any type of crackdown on these cities. Unfortunately, the bad news continued through 2016, as distrust of the nation's leadership and judgment deepened, on the issues of loose border controls. Rather than protect the borders, Obama chose to encourage illegal immigration from Mexico and other countries. Tens of thousands of illegals co-opted Mexican train rides from deeper in Mexico to the U.S. border. Like the 14 million illegal immigrants before them, they scaled fences and what limited border walls are in place to get into the United States without green cards and without lawful entry. Many are youth and children, unaccompanied by adults. Others are angry, arrogant adults not looking for work but seeking out gang membership, flooding into the nation without controls imposed by a feckless Obama administration. Many call it a liberal progressive conspiracy of neglect, aimed at swelling the ranks of a future Democratic voting base across the country. The liberal lawmakers hide behind sanctimonious self-praise for their social justice of non-citizens and liberally ignore lawful security and protection for 325 million legal U.S. citizens. The liberal relative moralist would have us believe all the illegal immigrants flooding into our country are just poor children coming to America. They ignore the fact that many of them are really dangerous gang members from Mexican drug cartels and Central American countries where the criminal gangs are vicious murderers and thugs. They're not coming here to make our culture better. Rather, they're coming to poison the well with drugs, murder, and related criminal actions. The liberal media buries the story, and American culture continues to turn more gray. MS-13 is one such example of the gang spreading across America. MS-13, also known as La Mara Salvatrucha, is one of the largest criminal organizations in the United States, with more than 6,000 members in at least 46 states and the District of Columbia, the U.S. Attorney Office has said. In addition, more than 30,000 MS-13 members operate internationally, most in El Salvador, Mexico, and Honduras and Guatemala. MS-13 uses violence to intimidate rival gangs, using weapons ranging from firearms to machetes, and today the Mexican drug cartels hires MS-13 to provide muscle and intimidation to other rivals, operating in Mexico and throughout the United States. The Center for Immigration Studies reported in a fact sheet that between 2005 and 2014, nearly 3,000 MS-13 gang members were arrested by ICE across the country, demonstrating MS-13's dark reach into our society and cities. More recently, on April 14, 2017, CNN reports that on Long Island, New York, it appears the local MS-13 gang is responsible for a string of horrific torture and murder. 4 young men, ages 16 to 20, were found dismembered after hideous torture with sharp instruments, an indication of MS-13's retaliation killings. And in March of 2017, 13 MS-13 gang members were arrested and charged with the heinous murders of 3 teenagers last fall in 2016. The Center for Immigration Studies reported in 2013 over 36,000 illegal immigrants caught and released during the Obama year. They became responsible for 193 homicides, 426 sexual assault convictions, and 303 kidnapping convictions. And a year later, in 2014, 30,500 are released, and 121 later charged with homicide. These are the true costs of a weak liberal policy of open borders and lax immigration controls, and the deeper cost to innocent Americans who are killed and victimized, and the permanent damage done to thousands of American family members. Their voices are eventually heard on Capitol Hill at the invitation of conservatives. They testify in public of the horrors that they have painfully experienced, and underreported or not reported by a complicit liberal mainstream media and ignored by President Obama. The General Accounting Office analyzes FBI and other government agency data regarding arrest of illegal immigrants and the crimes they commit. Of the 2.9 million arrested, they determined there is a real cost to safety and lives in the country. They determined the illegals and non-citizens make up 11% of our nation's population of 325 million, yet they account for committing between 22 to 37% of the murders in the country. They kill and murder at a rate that's 10 times the rate of all U.S. inhabitants. Under the liberal progressive malaise, our constitutional freedoms of expression through speech and related critical thinking are openly suppressed. The liberal left, Moral relativists by moral ideology are actively trying to silence free speech in America. This is any speech reflecting ideas or opinions they don't agree with, clearly putting our right to free speech under assault. Kirsten Powers, hardly a conservative but a decided liberal herself, honestly recognizes what the illiberal left is doing. Highlighting in her book, The Silencing, How the Left is Killing Free Speech, essentially she writes, the progressive take on issues is an objective take, one that cannot concede there are other legitimate points of view. As William F. Buckley once quipped, a liberal is someone who claims to be open to all points of view and then is surprised and offended to find that there are other points of view. Other thoughtful authors come forth and publish similar critiques where they forthrightly state how the left, once champion of civil liberties, is today orchestrating a coordinated campaign to bully Americans out of free speech. Wearing a Gadsden flag hat to work could be considered racial harassment, according to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the government body that oversees hostile work environment harassment claims against federal agencies. Really? George Orwell once wrote, "If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they don't want to hear." And we now know that moral relativists don't want to hear anything which contrasts or conflicts with their frozen opinions. Our nation has become pulverized into left and right. Extreme partisanship has paralyzed Washington and much of the nation. And when we can't talk to one another, two things are impossible: cooperation and running effective government. Some say we now face death of deliberation. They might be right. Perhaps one of the most disturbing developments which occurred over the past 8 years was the squandering of national focus on real priorities for the country, and accompanied by an overall incoherent strategic misleadership. On the chart to the left are listed the national priorities for 325 million Americans, as reported by Pew Research in January 2016. It's a good list and would hold true for almost any year in America. In addition to these, we have nearly 30 pressing world and international priorities for the United States. All are important, if not critical, to the safety and well-being of American citizens. Just to put things in clear perspective, we've been talking about those things which breed distrust in our nation's leadership, and clearly this is a very solid example. Over the past 8 years, Barack Obama and his administrative team have actively ignored or worsened our country's progress on real important priorities. And instead of effectively leading on the tough stuff, they retreated into soft issues, without strategy and without the courage to take on the important things. Instead, they pursued an easy agenda, many times for personal legacy reasons. During his 2 terms in office, Obama was concerned about what historians would credit him with, more so than the real issues facing the nation, and which competent leaders take on and get done. So what does he accomplish? Soft things that appeal to a loud liberal base. Example in point, his commutations record over his 2 administrations. An astounding 1,715 criminal drug dealers and distributors are either pardoned or had their sentences commuted, more than the 11 preceding presidents combined. To add salt to the wounds, he commutes the 35-year sentence for Chelsea Manning, the Army private who was convicted for passing secret documents to WikiLeaks. Everyone in the military and intelligence organizations, as well as reasonably minded Americans, were simply stunned by Obama's action. And in Chicago, Obama commutes the sentence of Oscar Lopez Rivera, a 55-year sentence imposed for heading up the Chicago-based cell of the Armed Forces of National Liberation, a group responsible for 120 bombings, killing 6, injuring dozens, armed robberies, interstate transportation of firearms, and conspiracy to transport explosives to destroy government property. Even many liberals are astonished with Obama's actions, especially ones living in Chicago. And clear-thinking Americans see a radical anti-government young Obama strike again. On another front of Obama's liberal strategy, we have his diligent focus and efforts for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender groups. And rather than focus his energy and time on national priorities and major international concerns facing the country, Obama again swings to the much less significant populist concerns, hoping to broaden a legacy he desperately covets and expand the liberal voter base through identity politics. Obama issues directions to school districts across countries, instructing communities to accommodate transgender students with a separate bathroom, or more troubling, access to a bathroom of their choice. Many states repulse this executive direction by moving towards bathroom bills to ensure sensibility to male and female genders, and some states choose to encode his presidential meddling into their state law. On the subject of marriage, Obama expands his social engineering priorities by abandoning traditional marriage and the nuclear family as clear formative institutions, and opting instead for gay marriage, a clear indication of moral relativity. Concurrently, the American culture starts to reel. Liberal identity politics promotes the me culture, victimhood, and a deepening of identity social engineering into our society. Facebook lists 58 options in February 2014 for users to regard and use when talking to other people. No longer are we Mr. or Miss or Ms. Sane Americans recognize the insanity. December 2015, New York City, the liberal progressive government passes an ordinance which requires businesses and other organizations to recognize up to 31 different gender identities to avoid penalties which could amount between $125,000 to $250,000. This is a priority in a city under direct threat of terrorism, poverty, crime, and debt, where school systems are failing, where the poor are now poorer. This is what the local New York leadership thinks is appropriate to expend limited resources on? Again, with very real concerns in the minds of most of the 325 million Americans, with real critical issues pressing upon our country, many of which mean life or death, Obama chooses to pursue transgender concerns as a national priority? Seriously? Especially when you consider transgenders make up a microscopic percent of the U.S. population, about 94,000 people, versus the legitimate concerns of 325 million Americans. When your national leadership becomes fixated on the trivial at the direct expense of critical concerns, it gives reasons to question its judgment, if not competency. Leaders who fail to lead often pivot towards soft issues to avoid the tough ones. Regarding the social engineering of transgenderism, what would a genuine world leader have to say? Someone who truly regards the health of the world culture and is not pursuing political gain with identity politics. And we hear from Pope Francis in a straight, honest declaration, transgenderism equates to the annihilation of man. Pope Francis cuts through the nonsense of politics. He knows that there are political and anti-cultural forces undermining a healthy development of society, and he boldly calls it out to scrutiny. We need to ask ourselves some hard questions. Why is transgender even a topic of discussion? Why was this cause being pushed on society as a priority in 2015 through 2016? And who's funding and promoting this particular issue with such fever beyond the former president? Especially when the nation has so many real problems to deal with. Is anyone seeing red yet? If not, you soon will. Let's shift focus to another important dimension of our national culture within our legal institutions of government and political leadership. It's the policies, actions, and direction of our national economic health and stability, and our children's future, slipping into severe jeopardy. Just a reminder, the federal deficit is when we are spending more than we collect in taxes in a single year. A surplus would be the opposite, when we spend less than what we collect in taxes in a single year. And the federal debt is the total of all past deficits minus what's been paid back with surpluses. If we were to look at our national debt clock to keep track of our financial state, we can only draw one conclusion. We're in trouble, deep trouble. This is the national debt clock for the United States as of April 4th, 2017. And here, in the blue box, is what the country owes its creditors. Our debt as of April 4th is $19.8 trillion, and it increases every second of the day because of the horrendous interest the nation pays for the borrowed funds to stay solvent. One of Barack Obama's legacies to his presidency was to run up the debt by $9.3 trillion, more than all the previous presidents in the nation's history of over 233 years, and nearly twice what George W. Bush increased the debt by. In terms of how the United States compares with the top 10 economies in the world, who are also in debt, we are by far the worst in dollars owed, with the withering weight of debt suffocating our economy and the future of our nation's solvency. Here's an interesting chart showing the growth of the U.S. debt since 1900, currently sitting at $19.8 trillion, as the nation continues to spend and kick the can down the road. They tag someone else with the responsibility to pay for the growing debt, and that someone else will be our children and grandchildren. The problem is really worse than just $19.8 trillion, because the full nation's debt includes several other rarely talked about numbers, such as the debt of our state and local governments, which adds another $3.1 trillion. There's also another $3.79 trillion in state and local unfunded pensions. Then add in our total personal debt of $18.2 trillion as of April 5, 2017, which is inclusive of mortgage debt, student loan debt, and credit card debt. And last but not least is a whopper, $105 trillion in unfunded federal liabilities, including the U.S. federal budget deficit, Social Security liability, and Medicare liability. Add it all up and the conclusion is very clear. We as a nation owe $149.9 trillion. It's quite reasonable to conclude we are in trouble. This type of spending and debt is unsustainable. What's worse, our national leadership for far too many years has failed to deal with this issue. Instead, they kick the can, and they kick the can, and they kick the can. The nation's financial future is now in question. This state of suffocating debt didn't happen overnight. It's been increasing over many years, and we are now in a terrible financial state due to reckless spending. Relative moralists are bad financial managers. They don't recognize the limits or the responsibility for proper accounting for the public tax dollars. And their lack of legislative and executive leadership for the past several decades has put the country in a very, very serious financial position. Let's take a quick look at some other economic indicators, since there's more to the health of our economy than debt alone. With jobs and unemployment as of April 2017, we still have a weak picture. Over 14.6 million actually unemployed. Over 94 million people no longer in the American labor force and can't find a job. And 5.1 million manufacturing jobs lost since 2000, reflecting a continuing trend of jobs slipping away to Mexico, China, India, and elsewhere overseas. Regarding indices of poverty and the receiving of government assistance in America today, we have 42.9 million people living in poverty, 43 million receiving food stamps, and half the nation, 162.8 million people receiving some form of government assistance. Half the nation dependent now upon government assistance. And in economic indicators of money creation, we see very clearly how things are out of control. We're creating money at an alarming rate, across the board, up significant percentages, all indicating a weakening economy and a financial strategy of creating money by simply printing it. Now please go to 6B, Part 3, to finish our contemporary review of legal and civic.